So our next talk by Monte Bateman on lightning research at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center.
Good afternoon. I'm Monte Bateman. I'm one of the locals here. I work right over there. I'm at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. I'm a principal research scientist, and I've studied lightning my entire career. I've spent the last 25 or so years helping NASA better understand the physics of lightning and help them to mitigate lightning. Florida is not a real good place to put a rocket port. That's what we help them with. So I work for NASA, I work for NOAA, and I also work for the DoD. So why is NASA interested in lightning? Well, Apollo 12, 1969, triggered lightning to itself. Back then, they didn't really understand the physics that well, so they did exactly, completely, perfectly the wrong thing. So they waited till the charge in the cloud was at maximum and then launched the rocket. In the late 80s, there was an Atlas Centaur that was carrying a satellite. It triggered lightning to itself. It went this way to this way, and they had to destroy it. And so at that point, NASA impaneled what was called the Lightning Advisory Panel, and they came together. My PhD advisor was on that panel. And in the early 90s, they came out with what they call a lightning launch commit criteria. And I and several other people have helped them amend and moderate those rules ever since then. And then, of course, NASA is also interested in operational things. A lot of what Kennedy Space Center does is outside in a heavy lightning environment, and they want their people to be safe. And so we help them with that as well. So here in Huntsville, we use everything you can imagine to study lightning. Ground-based sensors, aircraft-based sensors, low Earth orbiting satellites, and geostationary satellites. Here is a sample of data. This is 2 million lightning flashes on one day in 2016. This was observed by the National Lightning Detection Network, which was assembled pretty much in the early 80s. It is tuned to only see ground strikes. So that's what we're getting here is ground flashes. And this is probably the earliest lightning display that you would have seen on your weather forecast. There are several others now. There's a company called Earth Networks. It started out life as WeatherBug. You may have heard of WeatherBug. Some of their stations have lightning sensors, and so Earth Networks is trying to fill in some of the gaps and look at more than just ground strikes. Then there's the Woolen. That's the Worldwide Lightning Location Network. It's run by the University of Washington. It's tuned in the VLF spectrum, very, very bottom of the spectrum. So it detects worldwide, but its detection efficiency is very small. And so Earth Networks and Woolen have teamed up, and so that's a common data feed. There's another sensor called the GLD 360, which is more modern, and it measures cloud flashes as well as ground flashes. And the point of going through all this is these are all commercial sensors. They sell their data. That's how they make money. But they don't mess with each other's data. And so that's where NASA comes in. I've done a bunch of cross-comparison studies between the two to see how do they do relative to each other. One of the networks that we run here is a 3D lightning mapping array, or an LMA. It's tuned into the 60 or 70 megahertz range in the VHF. The reason they chose that is because we would go into an area and pick an unused TV channel back in the days of analog TV. So we're listening in the 60 to 70 megahertz. It uses time of arrival to 4D locate sources in the cloud. And you'll see some really neat videos here in a minute. That's the way that we can view lightning inside the cloud. If you think about a cloud, every time there's a lightning flash, the whole cloud lights up and you can't see any detail. But if you can map it in the RF, then you can see detail and watch it progress. Huntsville was one of the first places that one of these lightning mappers was put into operation. So here's a map of the stations in North Alabama. So here's the first video. This is just lightning flashes mapped by our LMA. This is 5 hours worth of data early one morning. Okay. Well, I don't seem to be getting video control here. Any ideas about how to make a video play? Usually there's a play symbol that comes up at the bottom.
Yeah, there's nothing. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't pop up as a video. This one, correct?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't look like it's. It should be showing up as a video already, right? Oh, enable content.
There it is.
Okay.
Excellent.
So let me put it back in. Oh,
Perfect. That's it. Thank you.
there you go.
All right, hit play. I'll get it. Come on. Well, where did it go?
Nope. Oh.
Okay, so I steer over my shoulder
Yep.
and I click play. Please? 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 Okay. Well, it's a lot less interesting without the video. Rats. Okay, well, imagine a large storm moving across northern Alabama. Rats. These are really cool, too. Sure. Is that going to work? Huh. My job is to always push the limits of technology.
Oh, the file's not in the PowerPoint itself. That's why it's not working.
Should be. Okay, well, we will soldier on. Okay, well, those were cool videos, trust me. So we move on from ground-based networks and we start thinking about how can we map lightning from satellites. And so the very first question is, can you see lightning from space? Here's a picture from the space shuttle in the very early days saying this is what lightning looks like from space. So our goals were, let's map out lightning, let's be able to detect lightning on the top of a sunlit cloud, okay, very bright sunlit cloud, and we want to still be able to detect lightning during the daytime. So back in the early 80s, we did a bunch of spectral measurements on the optical spectrum of lightning, And we found out that there's a very strong radiation line around 777 nanometers. That's an oxygen triplet line, which is strong in lightning because we have oxygen in our atmosphere, but it's weak in sunlight because there's no oxygen on the sun. So that was a perfect place to look for lightning on top of a sunlit cloud. So what we developed was an instrument that had an extremely sharp notch filter right at that wavelength. So that way we could see lightning in the daytime. So OTD was a proof of concept. LIS was a prototype, the lightning imaging sensor. LIS was destined to fly aboard the TRIM satellite. That was a pair of satellites that was supposed to fly in the late 90s and the early 2000s. So the idea was that the first TRIM would fly for 3 years, and then the TRIM follow-on would fly for the next 3 years. So we built 2 LISs, okay? Remember that. We built 2 LISs. So we put it in low Earth orbit, which is a challenge because you only see one spot on the ground for about 80 seconds as it flies past. It orbits the Earth every 90 minutes, okay? So that's difficult to look at individual storms because you only get 80 seconds to look at a storm. So, but if you piece together enough orbits, you can develop what's called climatology, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But the original TRIM was launched in November '97 and is supposed to last for 3 years. It flew for 18 years, okay? So the TRIM follow-on mission never happened. So we had an extra LIS sensor in cold storage over at Marshall. I'll tell you what we did with that. So here's climatology, okay? This is 15 years worth of LIS data over the Earth. So what do you see? 90% of lightning is over land, okay? You got to have differential heating to grow big thunderstorms that make lightning, and so it's over land. You'll notice that Florida is the hot spot of lightning for the United States. That's why NASA put the spaceport there. Okay? You look at hotspot here, Central Africa. Why? Why is Central Africa the world's hotspot? Anybody? There's no spaceport there, I'm pretty sure. Why is there a hotspot in Central Africa? It's on the equator. 12 months of summer. Okay? So, all right, the next question everybody asks is, well, what about here? There's an equator in South America. We're not real sure. Okay. So, this is what we could do with, yeah, and these aren't going to work either, are they? Well, darn. Okay. So, remember I told you we had a spare LIS sensor sitting in the cold storage over there. My boss tried 5 times to get that thing in orbit. The 5th time they said yes. So it's flown to the International Space Station January 7, 2017. Same old technology that we flew back in the 90s because nothing's changed. We had to build a translator box because the LIS was meant to talk to the old satellite bus, which they don't make anymore. So we had to build a translator box so that we could talk to the thing from the space station. There it is, being carried up on Dragon, SpaceX Dragon capsule. There it is on the arm being plugged into the space station. And so here is a repeat of the earlier map with data from the International Space Station. Very similar. That's good. We don't want to see something completely different from the exact same kind of a sensor. And so it's still there. It's orbiting. It's sending data down right now. Okay, so I told you, as we fly over the Earth, we only get 80 seconds at one spot on the Earth. The holy grail was to get one of these lightning mappers in geostationary orbit. Okay, do you understand the difference between low Earth orbit and geostationary orbit? Low Earth orbit's about 300 miles high. It's a long way. Geostationary orbit is 22,500 miles high. Okay, think about that for a minute. There are 3, okay? we have a geostationary lightning mapper, or what we call the GLM. And by the way, all of this hardware I've been talking about was designed right here in Huntsville at UAH. So the first one flew on GOES-R, November of 16. The second one flew on GOES-S, March of 2018. And the third one launched about 2 weeks ago, March of this year. Now, from day of launch till it gets to orbit is somewhere between 2 and 3 weeks, because we're going way up there. So here is a picture of the telescope. There is a picture of the telescope pointing into what's called an integrating sphere. And so this is a huge amount of bright light to simulate the top of a sunlit cloud, and then we can put fiber optic dots in it and create lightning signals so we can make sure that the sensor is working while it's still on the bench. There is the whole GOES satellite being integrated. And there's a cool launch picture. Now, I want to tell you two things. GOES-R was its name, but once they get to orbit, they rename it. So this one is now called GOES-16, and it's in the eastern spot for GOES. And you also see up here, very nicely illuminated, the catenary wires at Kennedy. That's what they use for their lightning mitigation when they've got rockets on the pad. Okay. And boy, is this a really cool video that I wish oh, it's gonna work. Look at here. All right, because this was gonna work, let me set it up. This is early data from the first GOES GLM, okay? I'm gonna show you lightning on top of clouds because we can stare at them now. We could never do that before. We can stare at those clouds and we find unbelievably cool things like, okay, before I hit play. So this is the US, here's Florida. There's a storm kind of over us where we are here right now, and you can sort of see the lightning on top of the clouds. Here we go. This storm makes lightning, and this is in the afternoon, and we know it's afternoon because here comes nighttime, right? The clouds go away. We can't see the clouds. It's still making lightning. We're on first night. It's still making lightning all night long. Here comes sunrise the next day. We're on day 2. It's still making lightning, okay? Now we're in the second night. It's still making lightning, okay? All night long, it keeps making lightning. Here comes the third sunrise. It still makes lightning. Now we're into the third night. It's still making lightning. Those are things we could never do with the low Earth orbit satellites. Now let me show you a similar thing. This is really cool. This is Hurricane Irma. All right, we got 4 days worth of data to show you from Hurricane Irma. And what the engineers, this was done by the folks at Lockheed, what they did was they moved the frame. So you'll see the background slide, but Hurricane Irma will stay in the middle of the picture. And notice, sometimes hurricanes make lightning out here in the outer bands. Sometimes they make lightning in the eye wall. Trying to understand why they do each is the key. Hang on. Here we go. So some in the eye wall, some in the outer bands. And we go into night. It makes lightning for a little while and then it stops. It's like things cool off at night and the lightning stops. We're not sure. We've got to figure this out. So here comes the next day. Now it's got a lot of lightning in the eye wall. And then notice as sun sets, it tails off a little bit, but not as much as it did the night before. Now here we come on the third day. Lightning in the outer bands, but not so much in the eye wall. And then here's the fourth day. Again, incredibly cool things that we could have never done with a low Earth orbiting satellite. Okay, if you want to go see more of these cool videos made by Lockheed, go to YouTube, search for GLM Lockheed, and you'll find about a dozen of those things. All right, how am I doing on time? 2 minutes. Okay, GOES-S was launched 4 years ago. It is now called GOES-17. It's in the west position. GOES-T was launched 2 weeks ago. It's on position. It's now been renamed GOES-18. So here are the footprints. The global lightning mapper in the east position is the blue. The global lightning mapper in the west position is the pink. And then the one we just launched is going to be right in the middle of the U.S. in a parking orbit because it fills the role of what we call hot spare. Here's a year and a half worth of lightning data. Almost 200 million here, almost 500 million here. Flashes seen by each of the two different geostationary lightning mappers. Okay, here's my pitch to the HamSCI community. What I'm looking for is a way to do incredibly ultra-wide bandwidth data acquisition. We can buy COTS parts that can digitize into the gigahertz. They're made for super high-speed Ethernet. Obviously, you can't save data from one of those that fast. So we've got to put in some high-speed signal processing. So a high-bandwidth FPGA, perhaps, could be taught, this is the signal we're looking for, save it, throw everything else away. I liken it to a spam filter. So why do I want this? We don't have any idea what the RF spectrum of lightning is. Everything that's ever been published rolls off with the instrument, which means we have no idea how high it goes. There's incredible amounts of fine structure in a lightning flash that ought to radiate up into the gigahertz. We ought to have microwaves coming out of this stuff, and it would be really nice to be able to figure out what the spectrum is for lightning. So, that's how you get a hold of me. Monte.bateman@uah.edu. You can find versions of these slides at a website I have called lightninganswers.com. And if you want to see the full version of this talk, I give this talk at the Huntsville HamFest every year, third weekend of August, and there's the website for the Huntsville HamFest. Sir?
Is anybody going to revise WX to image to take account of the new satellite?
I have no idea.
And does lightning go from ground to sky or from sky to ground?
Yes.
Let me just jump in here for a second because we're actually 10 minutes into the break. So first, let's give Monte a round of applause. I really like those videos, the ones that worked, and thank you for making it through. So if it's okay with you, we can continue to take questions, but we can still let people go out, get Danishes, and then, or I think they're European pastries this afternoon. So go help yourself to some coffee and pastries. We'll be back in 10 minutes for the next talk. In the meantime, we can take additional questions, or you can chat with Monte and the other speakers while having coffee.